Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and as you can see I've been busy cleaning out the drawer where all the vegetables and the fruits are stored in the refrigerator. So I came up with a bunch of grapes that I've already sort of started turning into raisins. There's a jalapeno in there that is showing some signs of rot and mold. There's one of these long seedless cucumbers, and it's still in that protective wrapping. So I'm going to have to kind of pour that cucumber out of that plastic wrapping when it comes time to feed it. And I think what's in this piece of paper towel might also be cucumber, but we'll only know once we explore it. Last but not least, there's a lime. So I've got my handy dandy knife, because I think we're gonna have to just puncture that plastic that seedless cucumber's in. And maybe while I'm at it, I could cut the pepper in half, I can cut the lime in half, and then we could be fair about splitting this up, because I got 2 bins to feed today. They're the bins that have got the African nightcrawlers in them. And these are actually the bins where we were seeing the growth of potato, because I threw a bunch of potato peels in here one time without freezing them. And last time we checked in here, we didn't see any. So we were thinking that we might be out of the woods on potato growth. But we might have been a little bit premature on forecasting the completion of that activity, because what's growing right there, I'm almost certain, is a piece of potato. I guess we would know for sure if we were to unearth it and find a little chunk of potato. Something about this little piece here reminds me of a previous check-in where I think I was trying to snap this piece and I just simply couldn't, because it was still so big and tough. And you know what? I've got my knife here. So perhaps we can finally do this piece over here in. It's still very tough, still very fresh. I did review the video from our last check-in, and I noticed that I had written down how it had been 41 days since the potato had been put in. And that was 11 days ago now since we came in here to feed. So that makes the potato peels 52 days now, and still capable of sprouting. Amazing. But now I'm kind of hoping that by breaking that piece up into 3 or 4 smaller chunks, perhaps now finally the bin can consume it, and it could turn into worm food instead of continuing to try to grow. And this little potato plant will also... Oh, what do we have down here? Oh man. So yeah, we've got potatoes going on here. This is just my feeding zone indicator to show where we last fed. When we last fed this bin 11 days ago, we tried to take a number of those coffee filters and stack them one on top of the other into little layers to make it into sort of like a semi lasagna layered arrangement. Here too I see stuff. I'm wondering if it's sufficient just to... Oh, see, like here I see a little seed of something. So this was not potato, neither was that other one that I picked up. What was growing over here, I don't know what that was. It looks like over here too, something might be growing, so whatever, it's not the end of the world. Eventually it'll all stop growing. But yeah, I'm curious to see how the layering of the food turned out. It was a bunch of stuff, like an assortment of different veggie scraps, which to me seemed like an arrangement of food that would probably get consumed pretty quickly. But before we dive down into the feeding area, why don't we just verify that the outskirts of the bin are doing good. There's another little piece of potato, which I just can't seem to resist snapping up into little pieces anymore now when I spot it. So stuff out here looks really nice, coming along really good. Here and there when I bump into something, I just feel like I want to snap it. But most of those were probably pieces of corn cob from what I can tell, the way they looked and felt and broke in my hand. Very nice. For a while there I was doing so good, always sort of verifying that the outskirts of my bins were doing okay during each check-in, but then I sort of drifted away from that. I noticed over a few videos I had just completely stopped doing it. So I wanted to try to remind myself to make sure we take a quick peek on the outskirts of the bin before we dive into feeding. So we can do that on this edge too, and then we'll see how our lasagna layered feeding arrangement turned out. I guess since there was like a coffee and worm chow mix on the very top layer, and then there was a coffee filter below that, and then there was like the arrangement of the yummy fresh veggie and fruit scraps or whatever that was. I can't remember what it was exactly. I think it was like chunks of lettuce and pieces of potato, carrot peels, and maybe the sort of stuff that would have been used to make up a salad. And then there was another layer with the coffee filter in between the bottom layer, which was just all the old food scraps that we encountered along the way. And then under all that was even another coffee filter. But I would have to guess that with those coffee filters being in such close proximity to all the foods, chances are that those coffee filters are probably, for the most part, chewed up. But we'll see when we get in there, so let's proceed with that. So I found a couple things like a banana stem, very far gone banana stem. And obviously all the other things that I've been encountering along the way, I've just been feeling compelled to snap them as I bump into them. But there's not a lot of leftovers floating around in here, it seems. Worms are doing a great job chewing this stuff up. Okay. I think the food was pretty much dead center, so we can do a quick till of these outer edges as well, as long as we're trying to remind ourselves that the edges can use a little bit of tilling once in a while too. Then we can dive down into the lasagna layers to see how they're coming along. And then we could just dump in the foods. None of this stuff has been frozen. Everything's almost like on the verge of becoming a liquid. So even though I freeze almost everything that my worms receive, today what they're getting is straight out of that drawer in the refrigerator. This is just more potato, which I can't resist breaking up into little bits. Alright, now my fingers are starting to bump into some larger items. I wonder what they might be. More stems of banana, some corn cob, something bigger here. Okay. Yeah, I guess in a few of my bins I've got some pumpkin stems going on. This to me seems like another banana stem, more corn cob. I guess we'll assemble our little collection of leftover food scraps that we find here. Stuff that we didn't feel compelled to break up, and then we'll make sure we sink it all back down into the feeding area. The stem of a pumpkin always seems to be pretty popular, even though you would think it's something that the worms would probably have no interest in. But I guess once those little holes begin forming down in the center of the stem, the worms really like to dig into it. And then even through the sides they somehow manage to burrow into it, it seems sometimes. So it's probably a much more porous material than straight wood, even though it comes across looking a lot like wood. So here we've got more corn cob. This I believe is also basically banana stem, but it's that bunch where the bunch of bananas all connect up together. And I remember this thing was really much more intact last time we checked on it, so it does seem like the worms have worked hard on whittling it down further. It's just so cool how the worms are just entangled within that object. That's just one of those things I would not want to try to break apart into little bits, because it is very interesting to watch how the worms gradually work that thing down over time. So while we're bumping into, and that thing was already leftovers, so that would have been right from the bottom layer already. So the coffee and worm chow top layer obviously would probably have no signs of leftovers. Unless maybe the coffee had been thrown in a huge pile and the worms were still just trying to make their way to the center of it. But the stuff was spread out pretty thin, and then it was all mixed together with the worm chow. So that, I believe, went pretty quick. And then all those fresh veggies that they got last time were all things that seemed like they'd provide no leftovers once the worms got into it. All those lettuce leaves and softer type food items. So yeah, when I watched the video, I thought to myself, you know, after 11 days, the old leftovers that we threw on the bottom layer were probably still holding out, but I bet you everything that was added as part of the that last feeding fresh, all the fresh foods, were probably long gone already by now. So it does seem like 11 days was a good interval to come back in here to revisit our little friends and give them some more food today. I tell you, this system approaching 200 days of age seems like it probably will go a few more feedings, and it seems like it would be nice to give them some sort of a bedding supplement. And last time they got all those coffee filters, and I don't see any sign of it, so they're obviously chewing it up. And since these are African nightcrawlers, the nightcrawlers definitely do like a good carbon food item. As much as they'll eat up the regular kitchen scraps, which are more nitrogen rich type food items, they also really do seem to like the just wood pulp, you know, giving them any sort of paper products, cardboard, whatever. You know, I got some napkins we can give them. I bet you those napkins will go quick too. So why don't I go fetch a couple of those, then we'll start piling in that crazy feeding they're going to be getting. Yeah, so these are not those little dollar store type napkins. These are those big IKEA napkins that my mom likes to use. So whenever I go to her house, I'm always very reluctant to just throw the napkins away. I always even grab not only my own, but if there's other people there eating, I'll usually grab the other people's napkins too. And this is even a much softer type of a paper than I would assume it's, I don't know, to me it seems like a much softer type paper than perhaps newspaper or, you know, regular white copy paper, printer paper, or perhaps even softer than coffee filter paper. So to me, when I put in napkin, I somehow always get the sense that the worms are probably going to do away with the napkin quite rapidly. So I figured I'd kind of try to jumble it together a little bit so it fits down in the hole nicely. And we can start returning all these leftover bits of food that we bought here for them. Well, we didn't bring it here, if it was already here. But the food that I did bring for them is going in next. And we're going to have to sort of slice it out, open out of its little plastic enclosures in a couple of cases. So why don't we come in with this other fancy napkin, and we'll sort of spread it out similarly the way we did the other one. This is a good idea here too, I think, because of all the moisture that's going to be coming in with these particular types of foods today. It's not the type of liquid that's going to just gradually be emitted from the foods as they thaw the way they usually do with my foods that are frozen here. The foods are just going to pretty much dump their liquids, 1, 2, 3. And I guess all that liquid that's, yeah, here's the pepper I talked about earlier, jalapeno. So we'll give one to this bin and we'll give the other to the other bin. In the same way we talked about divvying up the lime fairly between this and the next bin. So we got jalapeno, we got lime. It's like we're gearing up to have a whole Mexican meal here, right? All we need is some tequila. So now, this is what I'm kind of curious of, is this here. This is bringing with it a good bit of moisture, as well as part of a paper towel that the mystery object inside was wrapped in. So let's see, some sort of a some sort of a green something, which we'll save the other one for the other bin. And then we've got this. Holy moly. Here again, I'm just thinking, cut it in half, return the other one, return one of the halves over to the rest of the food to go in with the next bin that we're feeding, and then we'll see about somehow getting it out of its plastic enclosure. This will be tricky. Okay, there we go. It does seem like some of it's going to want to stay in here, but maybe I can kind of squeeze it out, because I don't know if it's going to want to just come out by the force of gravity, although, yeah, there it goes. We got it. Nice. Alright, man, look at that. These worms are going to have a field day with this feeding, I think. And none of it's frozen, so they can go right at it immediately, basically. I'm even wondering if maybe cucumber is what was in that paper, or yeah, I really have no clue. But we're not even done, right? Because we still have even more to give them, because there was a whole bunch of grapes in here, which I want to be fair, so I'm going to reach in here and try to give what appears to be about half of them to this bin, and we'll leave the rest for the other bin. I almost feel like I'd like to even, you know what? Scrap that idea, because there is a lot of liquid in here that I didn't want to just dump into the bin. I don't think that that's such a good idea. The material in the bin has already got a good moisture content to it, so I think we'll just leave it at that. There's a little bit of my worm chow, the most recent batch here, that I think we can include a little sprinkling of, so why not? Maybe it'll even absorb some of this moisture. And then we can cover up. Alright, so a little bit of exploration. We kind of drew out that feeding for this first bin, I guess, because we didn't know quite what to expect with the, I guess, the whole layered arrangement, but I guess what we found was that it was all gone, even the layers, the paper. So I don't think we're going to be trying to track down any leftovers in the other bin when we get to feeding that one. I think we'll just sort of open up the hole and plop in the food. But I think we'll do kind of a tilling of the perimeter like we did here, because I think that was probably a good idea as well. Just that as I kind of encounter some larger chunks of food, I feel like I want to sort of submerge them, but it's not all that important. The worms seem to be doing a pretty good job making their way around this entire bin and polishing off all the foods. And I got a feeling a feeding like this is not going to take long to be gone. Alright, so back comes the feeding zone indicator, holding out really good. Perhaps because there's nothing blocking the bright light that's in the room during the daytime. Because you can see this piece of plastic is somewhat translucent, allowing a good bit of light to come through. Although they say African night crawlers are not the types of worms that are put off by the light. I forget, one of the people in the comments even made mention of the specific word, photophobic? Is that the word? I don't know. Alright, on to the next bin. Let's get them fed, and then we'll be done. So here, I guess we must have felt that the moisture level in here was perhaps a little more than necessary because of the way we kind of haphazardly put this plastic on here, leaving a lot of space around the edges for aeration, possibly to try to promote a little bit of drying. And I could even tell just from the weight of the bin how heavy it seems, probably because of what might be a little bit excess moisture in here. And I guess if we get the sense that it could probably use a little bit of additional drying, we could certainly return it back to the shelf the way we found it, with the plastic put on here in such a way that it allows for a good bit of ventilation. I just figured I would try to grab some of that more dry material that's on the very perimeter that wasn't covered with plastic and try to sort of bring it to the center if possible, and then maybe we can even submerge that so that it doesn't continue to just be, oh yeah, very damp. I'm almost wondering if maybe leaving the plastic covering off entirely would be a good way to go in this bin. Because for whatever reason, it certainly feels like there's a lot of moisture in here. Here's some leftovers. So maybe we grab a handful of the dry stuff, sink it down there. Just when I start encountering really damp stuff, it's kind of clumping. I always feel like I want to try to break it apart a little bit, possibly aerate it just in case it's getting a little bit funky or has the potential to get funky. And I guess when I say funky, I guess I'm just referring to the potential of the material starting to go anaerobic, where it just has no airflow, and then certain types of more foul bacteria thrive in that kind of an environment. And, well, I mean, if there's no air, that also means that the worms are not going to be able to bee in there very comfortably either. So I guess just the fact that it's clearly full of worms is a good indicator right off the bat. But still, I like the idea of aerating it and declumping it a little bit if I can. So I'm just going to do a little bit of that here before we kind of close up the two outer edges. I just spotted a little bit of this weird blue shredded material that made its way into my shredder once and never seems to break down over time. I've been seeing a lot less of it lately, but it still shows up once in a while. I guess between me picking it out gradually and, you know, whatever, presumably it's because of that I'm seeing less and less of it over time. So yeah, I found one piece of corn cob left over here, and yeah, here's another piece of it. So maybe we'll start just kind of assembling a little collection of leftovers so that we can do what we did earlier, which is create a separate leftovers layer on the bottom and then pile the freshly added newer stuff on top of it. Lots of dampness in here. Yeah, I think there'd be a good, yeah, there'd be a lot of benefit, I think, to removing the plastic, or, you know, just not putting it back on basically when we're done here, and giving this whole system a chance to dry. That just means that the top layer is going to become completely dry, so the next time we come back in here we'll have a bunch of dry material on the top surface that we'll be able to submerge down into the system, and hopefully by blending in that dried material with the more damp stuff down low, it'll help bring the overall moisture level of the system down. Here's the stem of a banana. So I was trying to just till the very edge and not disrupt the actual feeding zone, so we can go into the feeding zone and really see what's going on there. So here I just encountered a mating pair of worms. They're just latched onto one another. That's what it looks like when a couple worms are mating, which is always a good sign. Nice thing to see in the worm bins. But when I see it, I usually want to just sort of leave them be and let them continue with what they were doing there, because what they're doing there is something I like to see. Alright, let's get this feeding completed so we can let these little guys get back to work. Lots of worms in here. And I'm already bumping into leftovers. Leftover corn cob, leftover banana stem, another chunk of corn cob. Here, so far, no, I mean, if there was anything growing, it would have already poked through the surface and would have been visible right from the beginning. So perhaps in this bin we finally managed to bring a halt to the potato chit growth. And maybe even in the other bin, by breaking up those last few larger chunks that we encountered along the way, maybe we managed to put it into it over there too. There's another stem of a pumpkin. Yeah, you know, when I'm running these bins as sort of buddy bins or sister bins or whatever you want to call it, I guess when they're two bins that were launched on the same day with about the same number of worms like these, twin bins might be a good way to think of them. Because that means they would have been buddied up from day one, whereas maybe in other cases I'll take two bins that were launched on separate days and at some point pair them up. So these would be perhaps the ones you would think of as twin bins versus buddy bins, or at least that's kind of in my mind the distinction. So yeah, very nice busy bin. Almost kind of makes me wonder if this bin has maybe even more worms in it. I'm pretty sure that in my spreadsheet both of these bins were launched with an estimated, I think the number was 1765 for some reason. It's ringing a bell, but I could be misremembering. And I would like to think that, you know, the worms are continually mating and even further increasing their numbers, so even though that might have been the starting launch quantity or the launch population estimate, that was 189 days ago at this point, so it's quite possible that the number's far beyond that anymore. Alrighty. Another good reason for putting in dry bedding material. It might sop up some of the moisture from the surrounding castings and also help reduce the moisture of the system. But yeah, I think leaving the plastic off might be the best bet. For at least one feeding interval, next time we come back in, we'll reassess and see if it's worth doing it again. But maybe just one feeding interval will be enough to help sort of dry things in here a little bit. Alright, one more piece of bedding. Nice fancy napkin. And then we could plop in their spoiled fruits and veggies assortment from my refrigerator. Alright, that right there seems like a nice foundation onto which we can plop today's feeding. So I guess most of the stuff is in this bag, but we can maybe just drop in all those grapes. Here's the half of a lime, half of a jalapeno pepper, and whatever it was that was inside that napkin or paper towel. I believe it's paper towel. I just don't feel like I got a good sense of what it was. Now it starts to look more to me like cucumber. Now I feel like I've identified it. And speaking of cucumber, that leads us to the final object here. Ugh, crazy how it all just sort of pours right out of here. You can even see some kind of mold or whatever developing inside of here. So it seems like we've already given this stuff a head start on getting broken down by the mold getting in there and starting to work it. And now the worms are going to be able to work it too. Very nice. Alright, I got a feeling that the worms are going to really appreciate that feeding right there. Let's also throw in a little bit of this dry worm chow. This stuff's got some of that pancake mix in it, which is, I assume it's got a lot of flour in there, so maybe that'll also absorb some of the moisture of the foods we just added. Maybe some of the moisture of the stuff that we're covering up with here. Wow. Crazy. But the worms, I'm sure, love it. It's just more moisture than I think is necessary in a worm bin. I don't like to see all the material in the bin stick together and get clumpy like that. I really like to see the stuff be a lot more fluid and flowing and granular. And it's just way too wet for that. But somehow it's not sticking to my glove that bad, which is interesting. Alright, back with the feeding zone indicator. And I'm just wondering how much time to give them on this feeding. It doesn't seem like they're going to need a lot of time to polish off what they just got there. It seems like it's a feeding that would easily be gone in another 10 or 11 days. Well, yeah, 11 days from now. The system's 189 days of age, so another 11 days from now would take us to the bin's 200th day in service. And sometimes we try to check in on our bins on those sort of milestone days. Perhaps that'll be the next time we come in when these two bins reach their 200th day in service. Alright everyone, that's it for today's check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now. I almost forgot. It was our intention to leave this second bin uncovered so that it might dry a little bit. And that'll probably help a lot. Alright everyone, thanks again for watching. Bye now.